That's important, not to do too much of this, but we do need to check. Also, it's terrific to see broadcasters and cable sitting side by side in a kumbaya moment without punching each other or calling each other names. That's great. Thank you. And to the cable industry, I'd say, I guess constructively, you actually got your quiet period, didn't you? So here it is, by act of Congress in a way. I also think it's important to pick up on Mr. Rare's comments that it's important to look at the positive benefits for just a second of digital television, and that hopefully, 5-6 months from now, this is behind us, and consumers are talking about the great benefits of DTV and why we did this to begin with. Better picture quality, better sound quality, more channels all for free over the air, plus on the other side of the public interest ledger is freed up spectrum that we're able to use hopefully one day for public safety, as well as all those wonderful new technologies that we auctioned off licenses for in the 700 megahertz auction. So let's not lose sight of that. I don't want folks reporting on this story to think this is all just doom and gloom and why the heck are we going through this to begin with. There are going to be a lot of huge net benefits to all Americans at the end of this. But it is a trying time, a difficult time, and it's producing a lot of anxiety right now. So I'd like to actually kind of go back before I focus just on call centers. There's a couple of questions on, go back to a theme that I started with the other panel, which is really for Mr. Rare and Mr. Lyle. In terms of ownership over each DMA, again, there are only 210 TV markets in this country, for those watching at home, called designated market areas or DMAs. And I found it, and granted my travels on this started in August, and a lot has happened since August, but even some recent travel in the past few months has found that it's hard to find who's actually got ownership. If I wanted to call someone and say what's happening, and I'll just make up a market 156, I don't even know what market that is, who could tell me and who's sort of cracking the whip there? So, Mr. Rare, I'll start with you. Is there within your organization sort of an organizational chart of as to who actually has ownership over a particular DMA?
No, and with all due respect, I'm not sure that's the optimum solution. This is for the following reason. It may be, and we're open to talking about it, the way we've organized our effort, which I said at the outset, I think has been pretty successful from a broadcaster perspective in educating America and making sure they're aware of the transition, et cetera, has been running it like a national campaign. Our campaign manager, Jonathan Collegio, is with us in the back. He's done a phenomenal job. We've empowered all of the stations to run commonly themed messages. We've given them empirical information, and then we've allowed them to all use their entrepreneurial best to get the messages across. And I think that's worked pretty well so far.
Yeah, if I could interrupt and actually respectfully disagree with a little bit about that. Yeah. That yes, I think there's a high degree of awareness that something's going to happen, as I said in my opening remarks. But I've been yelled at in too many town meetings across this country about exactly what it is folks are supposed to do. So the nuts and bolts. So from the general awareness, something's happening digitally on February 17th, yes. But then you get into confusion with cable operators. They're upgrading their systems to go all digital, and folks are confused about the set-top boxes that a cable company might be needing to sell them for that versus the converter box that they need for free over-the-air TV. I was yelled at in early November in a Philadelphia town hall by people very confused with Comcast going all digital in their campaign, which they launched around Halloween, just before I got there, about this exact issue. And they, allegations that the government was conspiring with the cable industry to make this something where people were required to hook up to cable. Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion. There's some procrastinators out there too. That's why stores are open late on Christmas Eve, right? But there are a lot of people who are just confused, or through no fault of their own, as we found out repeatedly, just aren't prepared. So, but the answer is, from NAB's perspective, you run a national campaign. But from the State Broadcaster Association perspective,
well, and I have nothing to yell at you about, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm not yelling at you either. I'm just talking.
Give me a day. Well, for the most part, the state association is the conduit for the state broadcasters, for the state DMAs. And so for a question regarding a DMA, you should start, probably the question should start with the state association, because we seem to have the pulse of what is going in our respective markets. Now, I think after your public notice tomorrow indicates, just what direction and what options stations have in moving forward, I think we'll have a clearer picture exactly of which DMAs are doing what.
Well, let me give you another example, which is when I went to Boston, I think, what month was I in Boston? November? November, thank you. It's kind of a blur. But I was in Boston in November as well. Same week I was in Philly, right? That's right, okay. So in Boston, they actually, that DMA seemed to have its act together, I think also thanks in part to Chairman Markey, who obviously took a hometown interest in that. But it ended up during a meeting I had with all the local broadcasters that there was one broadcaster who may or may not have been a member of the state association, I can't recall, who was electing, this is an affiliate who was electing not to go join his fellow broadcasters with the soft test. And this was sort of a throwaway remark at a luncheon we had. And I said, wait. Everyone's really got to do this at the same time. You can't have just one station's viewers clueless and in the dark. It actually took a phone call from my office to that broadcaster to get that to happen. There didn't seem to be any other initiative. No one was coming to me. There didn't seem to be a great initiative beyond just informing me that should be resolved in some other way. But that sort of thing is very important. In the sense that I've gotten, and it's not a criticism now, and especially now that we've got an extension, that there really needs to be ownership of each DMA. There are only 210. It shouldn't be that hard. There should be someone, and a corresponding ownership here at the Commission, but someone who's got ownership over each DMA and is going to be held accountable for the broadcasters and all the third-party groups and civic groups and community organizations to work together to get the job done. And that's the extent of my remarks. So let me actually jump over to the call center.
I'm sorry,
real quick.
If I could just jump in. I think one thing that everyone should be aware of, because I face this every day, is that whatever decisions we make in executing our plan, they have to be empirically based. I mean, I hear from people every day, positives, negatives, you should do this. People stop me at my elementary school and say, well, what you really should be doing is having balloons. Well, okay, great. But I think when we're making decisions that affect the entire nation, we have to look almost dispassionately about it and go, what does the research and the evidence say?
I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, as I've tried to point out too, each market has its own challenges. Commissioner Adelstein and I were in the Las Vegas market, for instance, last month. And because in Nevada, houses are constructed out of essentially chicken wire and stucco, that causes shielding of the signals. And so there's going to be more of a reliance on rooftop antennas. For analog, it penetrates better, a weaker signal or interference for those watching at home. Folks can still use rabbit ears, but when they go digital, they're going to have to get a rooftop antenna. Montana has its own set of problems. They have an unusual ownership, public ownership, special tax district ownership of their translators, some of which have the padlocks on them for 20 years, and people don't know where the key is. And they're analog, and no one really knows who's in charge of upgrading those translators to become digital. So there's a big analog pass-through issue there. So you're absolutely right. It's got to be empirical, but that's why I just discover these things by traveling, which is good, and it raises awareness and hopefully helps resolve some of the problems. And this gives us more time to, I guess, visit the remaining DMAs. But everyone's all smiles and has their act together the day the commissioners are there. But I don't know what necessarily happens the day after we leave. So that's why it would be nice to have some follow-up.
And my counselor just wisely whispered in my ears, Dennis, there's certainly some antitrust issues when you get an entire market of competitors together on the phone and talk strategy and things like that. So I think that's something that is always sensitive as well. Well,
it's sensitive as well, but first of all, I would have you rely on the counsel of your antitrust attorneys, either from your associations or individually with each station. Absolutely, always rely on the advice of counsel. But we're not talking about collusion here. If the government is mandating you do something, that by definition is not collusion. So keep that in mind as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now I think I know the author of these great charts. It's Krista Witnowski, is that right? These call center charts. All right, very good. I was wondering who to give credit to these to. Lots of data. I just want to quickly now pivot into call centers, which is what I was supposed to be talking about. We receive a lot of calls at our call center, and more as different markets shut off their analog signals, as we get closer to February 17th. As we get closer to other dates like January 17th or December 17th, people have the 17th in their mind. I just want to run through a quick summary. I don't know if these are public or on our website, but it would be interesting, I think, for some folks to look at this, that of the folks calling our call center, and I'll be rounding up numbers here, about 5% are from consumers who were not aware of the transition. About 6% were aware of the transition but didn't act. We don't have as much sympathy for them, right? 43% of the people calling the FCC's call center had questions regarding the coupon program. And that leads me to another point, which I'll come back to in here in a few minutes. 43%, so almost half. That's the largest single number. They're looking for coupons, and they're calling us. About 10% had initial difficulty with their converter boxes, and that has to be combined with a similar figure of 12% who had reception and technical problems. And there's probably a lot of common problems there. About 5.5% were consumers complaining about not receiving a signal, maybe a dropped signal or a lost signal. Then you had other problems in the other category amounting to about almost 14%, but 9%, the big bulk of that, were folks who wanted DTV consumer information sent to them. So you almost have to throw that, I think, into the coupon aspect of things. So that's about 53% then are calling us related to coupons or wanting some more information sent to them about that. So I think that's important to understand. The reason that's important to understand is there basically have been two phone numbers branded, apart from the individual DMA or individual broadcaster phone numbers, which I wholeheartedly support. In each market I go to, I thank the broadcasters who are doing that. I think every DMA really should try to have a common call-in number, and during the soft tests promote that number and have volunteers staffed by local colleges like we did in Wilmington, North Carolina, or community groups and charitable organizations, churches, et cetera, groups that have credibility with folks. And that was a big part of the lessons learned in Wilmington, which didn't always necessarily translate across the country, but some DMAs did better understanding it. So I think that's been very successful. But there have been two numbers basically branded throughout the course of this campaign in the past year or so. 1-888-DTV-2009, and that we all know inside this room, that's to get your coupon. Then there's 1-888-CALL-FCC, which is a long-standing number that we've had at the FCC for a while, but has been recently rebranded in connection with the DTV transition. Consumers don't understand the difference, as this data points out. They're calling our number to get a coupon, and they're calling DTV 2009 when they have a reception problem or other problems after the converter box doesn't work, after they've gotten the converter box, let's say. So, as I heard Mr. Martin, you say that initially, as I recall, there was discussion about new numbers that might be branded as a result of the cable call center or broadcaster or other third-party call centers, but that we're really trying to consolidate the calls around those two numbers. Is that correct?
We're trying to consolidate calls around the 1-888-CALL-FCC number.
Okay.
If
someone calls DTV 2009 and their converter box doesn't work, what happens?
That specific number is for applying for a coupon only for the most part. You can get to that number from us, but the branding is not going to be.
What about the other way around? Are you working with NTIA? If I'm a consumer, I've got my box, right. I've wired it up, the only number I know is DTV 2009, and I want to get a live operator to talk to them about why I don't have a signal. What happens to me?
The way that'll work at this point is if you call the DTV 2009, you'll be asked, do you want to apply for a coupon? And your other option will be all other information, and that all other information line is a reference back to the 1-888-CALL-FCC.
So they have to hang up.
Yes, sir.
And call 888-FCC.
Yep.
Okay. I think we need to change that. I think there needs to be a hot transfer from that number, seamless from the consumer's perspective. And I think that'll help be self-correcting. And I think there should be a hot transfer the other way around. If we're getting roughly half our calls to our number regarding coupons there should be a hot transfer. We can't help you with a coupon, but from the consumer's perspective, they don't know, they don't care about the difference between FCC and NTIA. They have no idea what we're talking about. They want a coupon, and they want their box and their TV to work. So if we can have one going the other way, if you're calling 888-CALL-FCC, and they're really looking for a coupon, push 3 or 5 or some number, if you're looking for coupons, and it transfers them to that other number.
We actually have that in the new coordination we have. We have the hot transfer to go apply for the coupon, and it's a very specific action that you do at NTIA, and that's just to apply for the coupon. The agents will actually take the NTIA coupon calls,
Great.
And most of it's a status check at that point.
So they'll take the calls if someone's already applied for it because it's a status check?
And that's the vast majority of those calls. Is someone's called,
They're
where's my
looking for
coupon?
status.
And the agent can check.
So they'll just answer it all together. That we don't have to do a hot transfer back to NTIA.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Excellent. Okay. So there's the sense then that we're unifying the numbers. All right. Mr. Martin, what other call center operations are we working with? Which ones are lashed to our number for the folks watching at home? That would be behind the scenes, backstage, you call 888-CALL-FCC. Originally, you just got the FCC's own in-house or contracted with IBM through IBM's operators or automated response units first, and then an operator. But now we have some allies. We have some help. We have more bodies, right? So who are some of those other allies?
The three major partners are the industry, which has a collection of vendors providing call center services. Our IBM contract, which has a collection of vendors underneath it providing call center services. And then our FCC, our in-house, what I've referred to, call center. It gets complicated, but primarily there's gatekeepers, the menu systems in front of all these call center vendors. Under the FCC one, we have a single gatekeeper, which is I'll call the interactive voice response, which is the IVR, but it's the menu system. Under the IBM contract, West is the gatekeeper, and then there are additional 5 partners behind them who are providing call service agents. On the industry side, there are 2 gatekeepers, an AT&T and a Verizon gatekeeper, and behind them there's a total of 6 call center vendors providing agents. So total, you have 12 agent pools, if you will, 6 of them coming from the broadcaster side, 5 of them coming through our IBM contract, and then the FCC's in-house contract agent pool. So across the board, the way they work is they run in parallel and they mimic each other exactly. So we'll distribute the calls across that based upon the number of individuals we have on the phone at the time, and then everybody who goes through that process will have the same process. So you won't know that I'm on AT&T gatekeeper or I'm on the West gatekeeper. So that'll all be transparent.
So a consumer calls the number. If it's automatically routed to the least congested call center. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right now, what are the, you said hundreds of thousands in your statement. You and I have talked privately a few days ago, so I want to see where the number is now. What's the maximum number of calls per hour you've planned for at peak time, at the absolute peak that you're anticipating?
At the absolute peak time, what we're talking about are peak time per hour or at a single point in time?
I'd say per hour.
Per hour.
Which is a point in time.
It'll be a summation, if you will, of all of the groups. But roughly you're looking at a simultaneous capacity in the neighborhood of 54,000 at this point. That multiplied, and then the question is how long is that call through the menu? Basically, we've timed the menu to be roughly a minute to a minute and a half, depending upon the choices you have selected. So you can do a simple amount, we'll say 50 is roughly the amount of folks that can pass through a menu on one line. 50 by 54,000 is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 million. So
2.5 million per
hour.
2.5 million calls per hour, roughly.
This is the throughput capacity.
Throughput capacity. Okay. And behind those 2.5 million calls per hour, how many live operators at the peak time were anticipated?
At the peak time for the February 17th, before we get into the discussion about what's going to happen June 12th.
Well, that's a very important point, which I'll get to in a minute.
We were projecting somewhere in the neighborhood of about 9,000 agents on. I believe the actual number was in the neighborhood of 8,600 to be exact.
8,600 live operators.
Live operators on at the peak time, which is roughly 4 o'clock, somewhere between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock on February 18th.
Okay, and the average call length is anticipated to be what, based on the data that Krista has provided?
We have recently agreed upon a call length in the neighborhood of 4.5 minutes.
That's 4.5 minutes with the live operator? Or
With
the
the live
automated
operator,
unit?
yes, sir.
Okay, so does that work? 8,600 live bodies times 4.5 minutes equals 2.5 million calls in an hour?
No, the actual call resolution rate would be longer. So we actually have more capacity of folks coming through the door than we do on the agent being able to resolve the calls.
Explain that to the folks watching at home who aren't quite sure what you just said.
If you make the assumption at 4.5 minutes, or to make it easy, I'll say 5 minutes for the call length. Roughly, an agent can handle 12 calls per hour. So, 12 calls per hour. So if an agent is handling 12 calls per hour, and you have, for simplification purposes, we have 10,000 agents, they're handling 120,000 calls per hour. So, rough order of magnitude, the throughput is in actual servicing the individuals, 120,000 agent calls per hour.
With a live agent?
With a live agent. Now, some of that volume may end up over applying for a coupon at NTIA. So your front door throughput, you will lose some of your, the idea is that some of your call volume will be directed more appropriately to apply for a coupon. There is an option to get retailer information. The idea is that some of the throughput will go to this retailer information, and that will satisfy the customer's needs. I think overall, the other options are basically straight to the agent at that point. So, although you may have more upfront capacity, you have to maintain, we have the real driver here, and that's why there's less of a focus on the number of people coming through the front door, through the gatekeepers. The bigger concern, the large concern, is focused on the agent's ability to handle and the time that the agents can process those calls in. Okay,
so that's 120,000 per hour with live agents. And average call duration is 4.5.
4.5. We saw 3.5 in Wilmington.
Okay. So let me ask you about then, have we tested to make sure all these call centers are lashed together? In other words, the call rolls over to, I don't know where they are all scattered. Are they all in the U.S.? Where are they all? But physically?
Actually, physically, they're probably all over the country. They are all U.S. based, so we know that much. Some of the call center vendors will provide agents at home. So there's this, you work from your home and you dial into the call center. So it is a safe argument that you will find many locations where these agents will be working from. So, and I go back to the question of,
well, we're talking about
the peak volume, 120,000.
Yeah, we're talking about peak volume. We're talking about how long it's going to take, and also are they lashed together have we tested to make sure the call rolls over, and from the consumer's perspective, with the best of intentions you might have,
right,
they call and they're disconnected, which happened to me several times.
That was a
while ago. That was before we started troubleshooting. Yes, sir.
We met with industry last Wednesday to actually start putting this together. And I will say by the end of the weekend, we had established the architecture, and it was being built at that time. Our hope is by the end of this week to have completed building that architecture and test it quickly over the weekend and through Monday, so that by February 12th we can turn it on and keep our fingers crossed on some level.
So we can all test it February 12th?
On February 12th, that number should be online, yes, sir.
Okay. So this goes back to something we just mentioned a minute ago. So February 17th, this has been, branded really for about 3 years, and a lot in the past year or so, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars spent branding February 17th. Most people, I will hazard a guess, are not aware of the change in the date. I think you will continue to get a lot of calls on February 17th, so my recommendation is just anticipate you are going to get pretty much the same call volume, maybe a little bit less, but that you originally were planning for on February 17th. Is that the case? Are you still managing full capacity? This isn't a dress rehearsal, by the way. This is real. This is Act 2, let's say, of this play. So it's you're live, and this is not a dress rehearsal. It's not a practice. But are you ready to go with the maximum call volume on February 17th and thereafter? a couple days there.
As we've been planning for the maximum call volume. I will say with the PN that the Commission has recently released, broadcasters informing us when they are going, specifically when are they going on the 17th or not, will help us model what may or may not be the likely scenario come February 17th. Depending upon the information that we can glean from that model, we'll be able to address whether or not we should be at full capacity at that time.
If I can just make one recommendation, which is throughout the entire DTV process, there have been a lot of models. Some very smart people with the best of intentions have modeled these things. This country has never gone through something like this before. So my model would just be the worst nightmare scenario you can imagine and plan for that because there's really no statistical or empirical way to plan for what was about to hit us. So that's just one piece of advice I'd like to give. A couple more questions. I realize we've got to move on. Yeah, I'm getting the, okay. What kind of training are the live agents getting?
The live agents across, it varies slightly depending upon which vendor is providing that training. They all have their own unique approach to training. At the very least, they're all getting training on the DTV content, or the DTV knowledge base, if you will, which is based upon the scripts, as we call them, the FCC information and consumer information that we've delivered. It varies in length based upon what vendor is providing it. We have seen anywhere between 12 hours for maybe some more experienced individuals and under tight timelines that may be appropriate. I think some of the folks on the other side of the house have agents who've gone through 4 weeks worth of training, but it varies. So I think you'll see at least online video-based training for most of these folks, and then there tends to be an interview approach, a Q&A with them, and then there's some on-the-job monitoring.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm getting the hook here because we do have to move on. Thank you all very much. May the force be with you. So, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Halstein.
Well, I think Commissioner McDowell asked a lot of the good questions that we need to have answered, and I appreciate your leadership, Commissioner McDowell, on making sure this 800 number works. It's so critical for people. We're going to handle so much of the problem through that call center, and of course, when that fails, then I'm stuck in making sure somebody's there to help somebody in the home when they get it. So the better these phone systems work, the less of a field operation we need. And since we don't have much of a field operation, we're really counting on all of you to capture the initial wave and to answer the questions. So we thank you for everything you're doing to make these call centers work. Certainly, we wouldn't have been, I don't think, in a position in February 17th we need to be. Hopefully we'll be by June 12th. I think Commissioner McDowell is right about the market-by-market situation, that we need somebody in charge in each market, that we need accountability. I have found great variability from market to market. Some places are better led than others. Some of our staff are doing a great job. Some are doing just an okay one. I mean, it varies as you move across the country. And part of the reason is that there hasn't been any national plan. There hasn't been a template that's been given out by us or any other federal agency to say, here's what you do on the ground, here's how you execute it. And so each community left on their own devices have varied to some extent. Now, I'm not saying we need a top-down national approach, but it would have been nice if we had a plan. It would have been nice if we had been able to give local communities a template as to how this could work so that there'd be some level of consistency, and then those could be localized to unique local circumstances. Commissioner McDowell mentioned Nevada. I came up with my own unique alternative there. You might recall the chicken wire in the homes. I said if you just plug the antenna in the chicken wire, you turn the whole house into an antenna. That would be my own. And all I'm saying is each community has its own challenge, but yet there are similar issues across different communities, which we could have done more and now are doing much more to ensure consistency and leadership on a DMA by DMA basis. So I appreciate your suggestion on that. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the cable industry for everything you've done to step up to the plate and provide great resources working with the broadcasters and NAB. And I talked to your boss, Glenn Britt, today and thanked him as well. And he mentioned your steadfast leadership on this, Mr. Howe, and we appreciate that. I know you've already been asked a lot, but I'm going to ask you for even a little bit more. I'm wondering, are you willing to commit, or are you planning to commit through the new date of June 12th in terms of the call centers that you're helping to provide?
Yeah, the answer is yes, and I think what we are working with our FCC partners and broadcasters is to figure out, okay, what's the volume going to be like? You know, what's the turnoff schedule, et cetera? Because I should add to Commissioner McDowell's kind of question, you know, all these calls are also being done to a standard. You know, what we're trying to work through common call center metrics, what's the efficiency level, et cetera, in the call time, so we get the best experience. All right, now think about call volumes. While we don't have all the data we need, it would be a bad turn of events if we overstaffed at the start and didn't leave either government resources or industry to go the full 4 weeks. So I think in the next couple days, we're going to be able to get a handle on the min and the max of this kind of effort, and so that we don't leave 3,000, 4,000 agents sitting around with no calls whatsoever. I think we're going to be able to find a sweet spot that has lots of safety in it, and then be able to say, what can we do with those resources to spread over time? And so that's the work we've got to do, and figure out what it looks like over 4 weeks with some peaks and valleys. Certainly one right away at the 17th, certainly one at the back end. What happens between? And figure out who, FCC, industry, individually or together, who's needed when, and make sure that we're not expending resources at the wrong time. I think that's work that's got to be done. We've agreed we're going to do it, and I think we're all fairly confident between industry and government we're going to get all those peaks and valleys covered.
Well, thank you
so
for
the
that.
Commitment's there.
Thank you for your commitment to do that, and thank you for working with us to ensure that it's neutral and open. I mean, this isn't used as a sales opportunity, but if somebody wants to sign up, they can. I think that's just the right balance. I mean, it is one solution to buy cable, but the purpose of this is not to sell that, and I understand that. So thank you for that, and I'd like to thank NAB also for participating and helping on that. Of course, one of the issues goes to you as to whether or not we're going to get a huge volume on the 17th. We're putting out the PN today, asking for stations to respond by Monday as to whether or not they plan to go ahead on the 17th with shutting off their analog. I'd like to get sort of an early read from you and Dennis, from you at NASBA, as far as what your early guess is as to how many stations you think we may be seeing wanting to transition ahead on the 17th of February.
According to our research, we have 133 stations that have already gone all digital. We have 60 stations going between now and the 17th. There were 272 notices to the FCC asking to go on the 17th. I think one good thing that you guys have done with putting this final notice out is we'll get a hard number. I think some of that was the uncertainty of what's Congress going to do. Will the deadline, if I need the 30 days, do I need to just put it in my back pocket? So I think, I guess the deadline on the new form is Monday. I think we'll know Monday in absolute terms what the number's going to be.
Well, that'll give us a good ability to kind of predict what kind of capacity we need at the call centers on the 17th. I think 17th is going to turn out to be one of the huge test dates that we learned so much from, and hopefully we can meet the challenge. I think we can meet the limited one, but we couldn't have met the larger one. In terms of what Rob really hit it on the call centers, I mean, it was over a year ago I suggested that we have one unified number. I mean, I don't know why we have two numbers. It's a big government, big country, but we could have done one number. And I was told off the record by some people within the agencies that we could have done that. I don't know if it's possible now to do that. It's still have two numbers and have them just go into one, or is that conceivable anymore, or is that ship sailed since we're so late in the process?
No, given the delay, I think that's feasible at this point.
Yeah. Well, I might add, Commissioner Adelstein, that when we do our video for the Nightlight, we'll have the national number. There may be some stations that also want to put their local number on. Remember, over-the-air viewers rely on their local stations. They're comfortable with their local stations. And we might have a lot of people who, rather than calling a national number they're unfamiliar with, will just want to call the local station. So I agree with you. One number eases the complexity of it, but I think also having that localism, which is what local television is all about, in touch with their viewers, will be helpful.
I think it absolutely does. As we go to local communities, we really appreciate it when local broadcasters, along with public broadcasting and sometimes cable, work together and establish local call centers. Ultimately, our goal, I think, is, and Rob will help spearhead this, is to have the seamless interaction between them. So if somebody has a local question, it can be handed off to a local call center for answers about what's happening in the local community. You can't expect somebody at our national call center to answer why on a certain hauler in West Virginia you can't get a signal from a certain channel. But if you can get to that local call center, they can. There's a lot of local questions, a huge amount as far as these transmission issues that are going to need to be handed off, and all these are going to have to be latched together. It's going to be an enormous effort, and I appreciate Rob leading that up. In terms of the number of numbers that are out there, and in terms of lack of coordination, we, on top of all this, put a contract out in the waning minutes of the last chairmanship to ARP to come up with yet another number. That is a national number. And I wasn't really clear on what the plan was. Again, I don't think it was part of a plan because we don't have one. And we certainly weren't consulted on it. And I still don't understand exactly why we need a new one. I love ARP. They're an excellent organization. We need them doing field operations, but why we need another separate phone number for seniors is still somehow escaping me a little bit. So I'm wondering, given that we put out a huge contract of federal resources for that purpose, is there some way we can integrate them into our call center system that we're talking about here today?
Yes. I believe Kathy had mentioned it earlier. A critical piece and one of the issues that we weren't able to overcome in the timeline that we were working with, the 17th date, was dealing with what has been called kind of the last informational mile, if you will. There's the last mile of you can get to the call center, we can resolve maybe a couple minutes worth, we can handle the high-level stuff, but when we need to direct the consumer somewhere else for more personalized service or more local service, we were only able to get a referral basis on that to the extent that we could hand the consumer the information, say, hey, but here's a resource that may be able to help you a little more than we can. Given the time frame, I think we can go back and we can address that broad database of contact information and see if we can't do warm transfers, see if there's a better way to get that consumer all the way from the national call center down to the boots on the ground, as the case may be, or the folks who are working in the local communities. So it's something we can explore at this point.
I think it's really critical we focus on that. I thank you for that.
I now know how Commissioner McDowell felt all those years when he was last to ask questions, and all the good ones have been taken. But there are a lot of other questions. I'll just ask one. I'm interested in knowing what your plans are regarding TTY and relay servicing, and also for hiring people who speak a wide variety of languages to staff the hotlines.
Currently, we have TTYs. TTY calls will come to the Commission's existing staff. So we have the volume that we think will come across those lines, which should be sufficient to be handled in-house. Through some of the contracts, the local contracts that have been issued by the FCC under the grassroots concept, there are resources under that contract that they will work a little more closely to try to get that integrated, similar to the issues that Commissioner Adelstein brought up. With respect to the language aspects, we are well prepared for the English and the Spanish division. Most of our other language information is been translated, and it's outreach information at this point, but it's really only available on the web. I think, again, with the delay, we'll have the opportunity to go revisit that. There are many options out there, three-party calling, translator lines along those lines that we can start integrating into the broader footprint.
Excellent. This has been a prolonged but a very informative and excellent panel. I'm really impressed. You used, Mr. Howe, the term public-private partnership, and as anybody who knows me knows I'm a big devotee of public-private partnerships, and I think this is one area where folks are stepping up to the plate, and we're getting it along. And I think with the time we have now, between now and June, we can improve it even more. But I would emphasize, as Commissioner McDowell did, the importance of making sure we have adequate resources for February 17th. So with that, we thank you all. I'll excuse this panel. I have been requested to provide just a short break. At this point, we are running a little late. It's 20 to 5, but we have an important panel ahead of us. So in exactly 7 minutes, I'm going to bring us to order. I like this gavel. So in 7 minutes, we will reconvene. Thank you. Proceed, please.
The third panel presentation will focus on reception issues and the Commission's Analog Nightlight proceeding. The presenters will be Julius Knapp, Chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology, Eloise Gore, Associate Bureau Chief of the Media Bureau, David Donovan, President of MSTV, Joel Kelsey, Policy Analyst of Consumers Union, and Michael Petricone, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, Consumer Electronics Association.
Okay, thank you very much, and I think I'd like to stick to the order that we had the panels composed of originally, which would be Julius and David and Joel and Michael and then Eloise. Julius would like to start.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on this panel this afternoon. The transition to digital television is one of the most complex engineering and technical challenges that this agency has ever faced. It required packing twice as many stations into spectrum that was already heavily occupied, all while minimizing interference. At the same time, we needed to prepare to later repack those stations for post-transition digital operation in order to make new spectrum available for public safety interoperable communications and advanced broadband wireless services. None of this would have been possible without the cooperation and truly exceptional efforts of the broadcasters, multi-channel video providers, the consumer electronics industry, and most importantly, consumers, all working together. We're going to need to continue to work together if we are to achieve a successful transition. Overall, the transition to digital television will ultimately be a win-win for consumers and broadcasters because nearly 90% of all stations will experience a net gain in viewers that can receive their service. In an ideal world, every consumer would receive the exact same stations for digital service that they currently receive for analog service. Unfortunately, the laws of physics and other factors come into play so that this is not always possible. I'm going to show on the screen just a handful of slides. And if you'll forgive me for the engineering maps, just to try to make some heads or tails out of these. This slide shows reception where the analog service area, which is represented by the dotted line, closely matches the digital service area represented by the solid line. However, because the station moved from a VHF channel to a UHF channel, some spots, such as those that are behind hills, may have reception difficulties as represented by the red symbols. This next slide shows a case where a station's digital service area is somewhat smaller than its analog service area, which could be due to any of a number of factors, including the need to prevent interference to other stations. Note that in this case, as in many others, the yellow rather than the red symbol indicates that the same network is available to those viewers from another station. And this last slide shows a case where a station has chosen to relocate its broadcast antenna tower. Many new viewers, represented by the green, will be able to receive the digital signal than the analog signal. However, there are some viewers who will now be outside the digital service area for that station. The Commission has prepared and published maps comparing the analog and digital service areas for all TV stations. We are continuing to analyze the maps together with other data to identify the hotspot areas that are at most risk for experiencing significant changes in coverage that may impact consumers. We'll share this information with our call centers and outreach groups to help consumers work through any reception issues caused by these changes. The Commission has also taken action to enable broadcasters to improve their coverage, such as providing for distributed transmission systems and repeaters, and we will work with the broadcasters to minimize reception losses wherever that's possible. Many consumers are concerned about whether they will need a new antenna. It's very difficult to predict whether a particular consumer may need a new antenna because there are so many factors that affect reception and antenna performance. We've been advising consumers that they should connect their converter boxes as soon as possible to check for their DTV reception. Most people will find that their existing antenna works just fine, but some will find that they may need a better antenna, particularly if they did not have an antenna that provides for good UHF reception previously. And of course, those are the folks we need to be concerned about as well, the folks who have problems. We're working on ways we can improve the information available to consumers and to help them to identify and resolve antenna issues. Engineers in the Media Bureau, in coordination with OET, have developed an excellent web page to help consumers determine what signals they should be able to receive. Consumers will be able to type in their address or zip code and get a list of the stations that are expected to be available at that location. We plan to make this tool available on the FCC DTV website within just a matter of days. The Commission recently implemented an analog nightlight service in anticipation of the planned February 17th, 2009 DTV transition deadline in compliance with the DTV Nightlight Act. The public notice that the Commission released earlier today encourages stations that terminate their analog signal on February 17th to continue to broadcast on their analog signal information regarding the transition and, if necessary, emergency information. Such service was provided for the early transitions in Wilmington, North Carolina and Hawaii, and was a great help to consumers. The public notice also asked that stations that intend to provide nightlight service so indicate in their analog termination notice, which is due to the Commission on Monday. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, there's been a lot of work obviously done on the DTV transition, and we have a lot more to do, obviously. And I know that with the great team here at the Commission and working with our partners throughout industry and consumers, that we can get this job done right. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. David?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I will be brief but right to the point because there are a number of critical issues. MSTV, as you know, has been the engineering organization doing much of the engineering behind the digital transition for the past decade. For the last year, we have been working with stations, with the technical side of the stations, educating them on exactly the information that they need to answer questions, particularly from consumers. We've also been working very closely with the cable and the satellite industries because those industries also have to be prepared. And I want to thank Kyle McSlaro and also the satellite industry as well for their hard work in getting us to the point where I think we are okay in terms of the subsequent retransmission of the signal from a technical standpoint. But today we have to deal with the consumers. And we have worked closely with NAB and the state broadcasters, and they have shown tremendous leadership here. But I'd like to focus on three issues. Because clearly, reception in the digital age is a three-legged stool. First, you have transmission issues. Second, you have your equipment reception issues. And finally, and also exceedingly importantly, are your antenna issues. So where are we on the transmission side? For the most part, I think as your own data indicate that most broadcasters are up and building and actually putting a signal out there. You have over 1,100, close to, I think it's 1,089 stations that are ready to go as we speak. But there have been some issues, by and large, dealing with coverage areas and antenna patents. And I think Julie brought some of those examples to bear. And certainly there are some issues there, and they focus on where you're likely to get some consumer complaints. The only thing I would ask is that, and it goes to your point, Commissioner McDowell, this is a very localized, market-based situation. Let me just give you an example. As you go into and look at the coverage areas of some stations, for example, some of the New Hampshire public stations, they have a change in population. And where they lose audience in Massachusetts, south of Boston. But they have configured their coverage to gain audience in the western part of the state of New Hampshire. So from that standpoint, even though there may be a loss, overall the goal is actually to serve the folks in New Hampshire a little bit better. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that as we go through this and look at coverage loss issues, I think we have to look and weigh the benefits and the costs. Overall, the entire system was designed to increase the number of viewers who receive free over-the-air television service by roughly 5%, largely due to the reduction in interference that would occur in an all-digital world. But having said that, and looking at the issues that we saw in Wilmington, North Carolina, we do understand that there are some important issues, particularly when you have coverage areas change and antenna patents change. And to that end, I think there's a couple of things that we can think about. First, I think the Commission has put into place the tools that a broadcaster can use, provided you can squeeze these in terms of additional translator service and also distributed transmission services, which I think are important. The second thing is I think we have to understand that you have roughly over 700 stations that have applied to the FCC to maximize their power. And to my knowledge, the Commission has granted over 600 of those applications. That will resolve a number of these issues. The final issue is the balance issue, and that is you have approximately 571 television stations that are moving from their temporary digital UHF channel back to a high VHF channel. And to the extent that in the VHF band propagation signals go out further with less power, you should have some coverage areas that are resolved. Now, having said that, there are a number, particularly in the low VHF band, that are going to stay permanently in the UHF band. And some of the coverage issues, particularly the holes that pop up that Julie mentioned in his slide, I think are things that one is going to have to consider. The second part of the issue of the second leg of the stool involves converter boxes. Now, I know the Consumers Union has tested converter boxes. We have as well. And by and large, as you know, based on a close working relationship with CEA, with the manufacturers, we have those converter boxes, the insides of those boxes, work very, very well. And I think that's reflected in the Consumer Reports study. One key thing we have to look out for is that there is a distinction between reception capability and scanning. What we have found in some instances is that the boxes move through the scanner too fast, and so they actually fail to register stations that are providing a strong signal in the market. The scanner isn't picking them up. So what's the solution? The solution in many instances then is for the consumer to move from the automatic scan function and manually press in the channel that they want. And it's not all boxes, it's certainly some boxes, but it's some of the calls that we have that come into my engineers, a lot of those problems are resolved by saying, punch in this channel. Now, there is one little piece that you have to remember. Right now, you have a number of stations who are broadcasting on interim digital frequencies, but the box is registering them on their old. For example, in this market, Channel 9 is actually being transmitted from Channel 34. Because of PSIP, which we have supported, it actually, and to avoid consumer confusion, it actually appears as Channel 9 on their set. But if they want to punch in, if they have problems with reception, they have to punch in 34. So I think that is an important part of whatever educational process we go through. And it's something that can be done, and quite candidly at the local level, in terms of questions that our folks get on a day-to-day basis, that is being resolved. But it's something I just think you ought to be aware of and be alerted to. For folks that are getting an antenna, I think the key thing here is we have to be careful in engaging in the upsell. This antenna that I have in front of me, which is a standard antenna that has been around for 30 years, the poles, the dipoles are your VHF, the loop is your UHF. We are advising consumers to start with their current antenna. And only if they run out of problems, then move to other antennas. I've brought another example of a new digital antenna that has amplification capabilities and what have you. But I think from the consumer standpoint, we start with this issue here, which is your basic antenna. I think finally, consumers have to know that aiming an antenna becomes very important in the digital age. And I think those are the kinds of things that we have built into when we're informing and educating our member stations. Let me shift to the second part of this panel, and that is the Analog Nightlight program. MSTV is ready, willing, and able to take the leadership in moving forward with the Analog Nightlight program. We think it is important. Already over the last couple of days, I have at least stations in 20 or 30 markets who are ready, or at least have agreed to go forward. Last Monday, Eloise was kind enough. We had a nationwide webcast to cover the Analog Nightlight issue. I think we have to deal with some date issues because of the transition being moved back. Your original date was, I think, February 3rd for stations that weren't on the list, and February 10th for those that are. We may have to look at that. I think the key thing that we have to look at over the next week or so is how many stations, indeed how many markets, plan to go on February 17th. Because those are the markets, if they are able to move forward, in which you will need nightlight service immediately. So I think the notice that you have provided where stations have to get back by Monday, I think will be extremely important. And with that, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. And at the end, I stand ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
We appreciate all your hard work in this. Joel?
Hi. Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking Chairman Copps, Commissioner Adelstein, Commissioner McDowell for the opportunity to testify here today. I'm Joel Kelsey, a policy analyst with Consumers Union, the nonprofit publisher of Consumer Reports. And before I dive in, I'd just like to quickly comment that in addition to fighting for consumers here in Washington, we also try to give consumers advice in the marketplace through our magazine, and we have lots of information available not only in our written testimony that I've submitted, like ratings of the boxes and advice for consumers on troubleshooting antenna issues, but also information online like a tutorial on how to set up your box, free of charge to everyone, consumerreports.org/DTV. We're here today to discuss the nation's progress towards the transition to all digital full-power television broadcasts. Yesterday, as we know, Congress extended the transition deadline to June 12th. We're heartened to see the FCC acting swiftly to take advantage of the extended deadline with today's hearing. We believe the two most important issues before the federal government are, first, getting converter boxes into consumer homes, and second, producing targeted information to help consumers troubleshoot any signal strength issues they may experience once they've hooked up their boxes. Before consumers must deal with signal strength issues, they must first find a converter box and set it up. So the most important step is to ensure that the millions of consumers currently on the waiting list at NTIA and the millions more who have yet to make the transition are able to use a coupon, purchase a converter box, and hook it up. With a delay in the transition deadline, we believe it extremely important to make sure the number of boxes in stock throughout the country continues to keep pace with the recent spike in consumer demand. There are currently 11 million active coupons and 3.7 million more on the waiting list at NTIA. With additional funding in the stimulus package and the ability of consumers with expired coupons to reapply, it is estimated that an additional 10 million coupons can be redeemed. These demand-side figures seem to indicate a much greater demand for the boxes than the federal government originally anticipated. The fact that consumers will seek the most cost-efficient path through this transition should not take us by surprise in today's economy. Retailers and manufacturers should respond responsibly by ensuring low-cost options are available to consumers that seek them. Actions must be taken to ensure that a sufficient supply of converter boxes will be available to consumers as adequate funding is committed to get the coupon program up and running again. It's extremely important for the federal government to act swiftly to provide assurance to retailers and to manufacturers by highlighting the anticipated expansion of the coupon program and the increased demand for converter boxes. With President Obama and Congress poised to spend an additional $650 million on efforts to address the transition, we believe there is surely some way to ensure that necessary production of boxes can get moving quickly enough this spring to meet all consumer demand, and we stand ready and willing to work with all to make sure that happens. Once consumers have hooked up their boxes, they need clear, concise, and unbiased information to assist in troubleshooting signal strength issues. When supplied with a strong signal, all the boxes Consumer Reports tested provided clear and crisp pictures. However, reception will ultimately depend on distance, terrain, and more. Some TV viewers may actually find the reception improves with digital because digital signals don't attenuate the same fashion as analog ones. But the downside is with digital, you tend to either get a signal or you don't, so poor digital signals may disappear completely. Many consumers are noticing that there are missing channels they received once perfectly fine with an analog signal. There are several factors that can contribute to a consumer losing a channel. First, you may have an outdated antenna and you need to upgrade. Second, the digital transition may be too degraded for your converter box to read, and therefore you see no picture. People are calling this the digital cliff effect. Lastly, we learned with the Wilmington test market that some broadcasters are reducing their geographic footprint of their digital signal. For these consumers that find themselves in this digital dead zone, it's important to make sure they do not spend money unnecessarily on new antennas. Based on the lessons the country learned during the Wilmington test and the many consumers who have written, called, and emailed us, we believe signal strength and antenna issues will loom large as we approach June. We believe much work needs to be done to get better information to consumers regarding whether or not an antenna is necessary and what the least cost option is should they need one. This responsibility is a shared one. Both the FCC and broadcasters, the exclusive owners of our many airwaves, the exclusive owner of many of our airwaves, must work together to get necessary information out to consumers living in areas at risk of losing signals. To ensure that the 116 days between February 17th and June 12th are used effectively, we all have a lot of work before us. We urge the federal government and manufacturers and retailers to gain clarity on how many boxes are currently in stock, whether these will be enough to meet projected demand, and what must be done if supply falls short. We also urge the FCC and broadcasters to use this time to do better in distributing maps of digital dead zones and quarterbacking the distribution of troubleshooting guides to help consumers through any signal strength issues they may face. We remain committed to keeping an eye on the marketplace and helping consumers cut through the noise with clear and unbiased educational materials through our website, our magazine, and our advocacy shop. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today, and I look forward to all your questions.
Thank you very much, Joel. And I would just say I saw the couple of pages that were in Consumer Reports on this, and I think that's among the best things that I've seen. Just a lot of information packed in an attractive and user-friendly way in 2 pages. Michael?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for convening this meeting and inviting me to discuss these critical issues. CEA is the principal trade association of this $172 billion consumer technology industry. Our member companies include the world's leading manufacturers, distributors, and retailers of products such as digital television receivers and digital to analog converter boxes. Our members invented digital television. We have taken a leading role in educating the public about the transition. Among other things, we are a founding member of the Digital Television Coalition, Transition Coalition, whose mission is to ensure that no consumer loses broadcast television service due to lack of information. I'd like to spend the remainder of my time discussing our analysis of the market for DTA converter boxes. Let me start by saying that from a market research standpoint, the DTV transition presents an unprecedented challenge. No one knows with any certainty how many consumers need, want, or will actually use converter boxes. Under normal conditions, it would be extremely difficult to predict with precision how consumers will behave or what the demand for converter boxes will be. It's even more challenging when faced with the current dynamic of a fluctuating economy and the substantial modifications made by Congress to the program. That said, I'd like to describe the methodology underlying CEA's good faith attempt to estimate converter box supply. Throughout January and this month, and even this week, CEA has been collecting confidential data and information from multiple manufacturers of DTV converter boxes, representing approximately 75 to 85% of the market. We also collected confidential data and information from major consumer electronics retailers and distributors. In short, here's what we found. In 2008, retailers placed significant orders for converter boxes in anticipation of a major spike in demand at the conclusion of the transition around February 17th. After filling those orders, converter box manufacturers ended production of boxes in early January 2009. However, retailers began to order new box supplies when it became likely that legislation extending the transition date would pass. We currently estimate the U.S. retailers have inventory of between 3 and 6 million DTV converter boxes on hand. Now, while it is extremely difficult to anticipate demand levels for boxes between now and June, especially since the status of the NTI coupon program and the funding remains ambiguous, here are the likely scenarios. The worst case is that there are only 3 million boxes in current inventory, and daily redemptions stay at 115,000 boxes per day. Retailers would then run out of box inventory by the end of February. What is unknown, and what makes inventory projections difficult, is that the NTI coupon waitlist is now at 3.7 million. So if NTIA were to suddenly issue all the coupons and say 65% of those coupons are redeemed, retailers could run out of boxes even earlier than the end of February. Another unknown is the impact of new rules allowing consumers with expired coupons to resupply. However, the more likely scenario is there are currently 6 million boxes in inventory, so that if we stay at 115,000 daily redemptions, retailers would run out of boxes in approximately 52 days. If this is the case, it is likely that existing inventories of converter boxes will be exhausted just as new box inventories begin to arrive on store shelves in mid-April, the result of a highly compressed 60-day manufacturing cycle. Generally speaking, the time from commencement of the ordering process to the time a product appears on the shelves can take upwards of approximately 20 weeks. So what makes the 60-day cycle possible when a typical CE supply chain takes at least twice as long? What has changed since early January? There are 4 significant factors. First, manufacturers and retailers understand the exigency created by the change in the transition date and are working in concert to shorten supply chain timelines to virtually unheard of levels. Manufacturers are securing shipment slots in the first available vessels, retailers are coordinating shipment pickups, and other supply chain coordination is shortening each link in the chain. Second, CE manufacturers are unfortunately not immune to the severe economic crisis and have been shutting down manufacturing of their product lines in recent weeks. This creates a virtually unprecedented level of excess manufacturing capacity, and that means that manufacturing lines can be turned on immediately and dedicated to the production of converter boxes. This ability to start up manufacturing immediately can cut weeks off a typical supply chain timeline. The fact that manufacturers do not have to allocate capacity to other products also means that they can make converter boxes 24/7. Third, because ancillary product lines are also idle, manufacturers have greater access to components, including chips, housings, and other materials, than would have been possible even 30 days ago. The ability to secure parts immediately without having to source them further shortens the timeline. Finally, when manufacturing lines are shut down, usually these lines are immediately retooled to manufacture other products. But because the manufacturing of CE products is slowed, many converter box lines were not retooled, thus allowing lines to start back up immediately, saving additional time. All these factors are new since CEA last estimated supply chain timelines for converter boxes in early January. Therefore, we now estimate that converter boxes will arrive on store shelves by mid-April. As I mentioned, it is extremely difficult to predict precisely the demand and supply level for converter boxes throughout the end of the delayed transition. There is a possibility we may have a temporary box shortage in February or March, but the more likely scenario is that existing inventories will be exhausted about the time that new boxes arrive on store shelves in April. I hope this analysis provides information that is helpful to the Commission. We recognize the transition is an enormous national responsibility. We are committed to educating the public and doing whatever we can to ensure a successful and consumer-friendly transition. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, and I will have some questions on that, but that was an interesting and an encouraging report. Eloise?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm very pleased to participate on this panel and to describe the public notice issued by the Commission earlier today. As the Chairman described, the public notice addresses the issue of whether and how stations may terminate their analog signal on February 17th, notwithstanding the congressional action to delay the transition to June 12th. In drafting the public notice, the Commission was mindful of the purpose of the Delay Act to provide consumers with additional time to prepare for the DTV transition, but also to provide broadcasters with flexibility to transition to digital service before the new deadline. The DTV Delay Act specifically references the procedures in the Commission's third DTV periodic review, which was completed and released in December of 2007, as governing termination prior to the new June 12th deadline. The public notice describes how the third periodic applies to the current circumstances and finds that terminations on February 17th, which would now be a pre-transition termination due to the change in the deadline, would have required submissions for Commission approval 90 days in advance, then followed by Commission approval, and then 60 days of viewer notifications. The public notice adopts a partial waiver of these procedures to permit stations to notify the Commission and terminate their analog signal on February 17th, subject to certain conditions. The PN further explains that terminations of analog service after February 17th are subject to the third periodic requirements, which are not waived. The result of this is that a termination from February 18th through March 13th would be subject to the 90 days notice to us and our approval and the 60-day notice to viewers, and therefore could not as a practical matter occur. For terminations from March 14th through June 11th, they would be subject to the 30-day notice to us and the notifications to viewers, unless, of course, the Commission takes up further action with respect to the third periodic. The public notice notes that the Commission reserves the right to reconsider this partial waiver in the event that analog termination on February 17th by a station or a group of stations is contrary to the public interest. The public notice details some examples. For example, if all or most stations in a market were going to be terminating their analog service on February 17th, and the market is one in which many viewers appear to be unprepared for the transition or otherwise at risk. If so, the Commission may require affected stations to submit additional information to explain and justify how their early termination advances the public interest. The public notice requires stations to notify the Commission of their intention to terminate their analog service on February 17th. These notifications, as has been discussed earlier today, must be filed with the Commission no later than Monday, February 9th. There is no engineering required. There is no fee, and there is no need to wait for a grant. We detail in our Note 11 to the public notice the procedures that stations should follow, and it is important to follow those procedures and to read that footnote, because that is the way we will be able to track the notifications and make sure that we get them into our system. I want to underscore that this short time frame, requiring these notifications by Monday, is essential so that we can determine where and how best to devote our resources and for consumers to be made aware. Listening to the panels today has further underscored how important it is for everyone at every part of this transition to understand which stations and perhaps which markets are going to transition early so that we can all be prepared, most especially the consumers. Stations that have previously indicated to us that they want to terminate on February 17th must notify us again. The previous notifications that they've given to us don't count. If you want to terminate on the 17th, you need to let us know on Monday. Stations are, furthermore, expected to provide these notifications in good faith and cannot change their plans except in the case of an emergency, a disaster, or if the Commission reconsiders the waiver. I also mentioned that broadcasters should update their Form 387s. You know who you are. We hope. Stations must provide 30 days' worth of viewer notifications. The content of the viewer notifications is as provided in the third periodic and detailed again in Note 13 in the PN. The PN also gives examples of how to calculate 30 days' worth of notice if you are providing that in the 8 days remaining after the Monday the 9th before the 17th when you would be terminating. I will note that stations that have already begun their viewer notifications regarding termination on February 17th may count from when they began. But those notifications need to be particular to terminating on February 17th, notwithstanding the extension of the deadline, so that it is clear to consumers. If in doubt, provide all the notifications that you need to provide, starting with Monday the 9th. Stations must also air additional crawls, if technically feasible, during the 7 days immediately prior to February 17th. The PN details exactly how that is supposed to be provided. This is to further underscore for consumers that this particular station is actually going to terminate on February 17th. We also take pains in the PN to remind stations of the importance with coordinating with the MVPDs, cable, satellite, and the other multi-channel video program distributors that carry their signals to let them know if the station is transitioning on February 17th. It's very important that cable and satellite are aware whether you're going to go forward or if you're going to wait till a later date. We are also urging in the PN stations to consider providing what we're calling a nightlight type service for 2 to 4 weeks after terminating analog programming. This nightlight type service is in the style of what stations provided in Wilmington, North Carolina, and in Hawaii, in the nature of a slate or a loop describing the DTV transition and what viewers need to do to be prepared, also providing emergency information if necessary. This is not the official Nightlight, Analog Nightlight, so the eligibility list does not apply because we are in the pre-transition period. And I will note that we have adjusted our notification form so that you can indicate to us, stations can indicate to us and should indicate to us that they are intending to provide the nightlight following their termination on February 17th. Public notice also points out that stations that want to operate a post-transition facility, a post-transition digital facility, that is not the same as their pre-transition digital facility, must submit a request to the FCC for approval as required by the third periodic. That is to say, if your pre-transition facility is not the same as your post-transition facility and you want to operate it before June 12th, you need to submit a request to us, provide engineering, and await our approval to do so, due to the necessity of determining whether there's interference. Stations that have notified us of their pre-February 17th terminations, that is to say, not on the 17th but before the 17th, may proceed with the termination or may decide to remain on the air in light of the extended transition date. These stations must let us know by Monday, February 9th, what they want to do, whether they're going to stay on or turn off, so that we can keep track of all the upcoming terminations. Stations that have already terminated their analog service in the past and want to resume analog must request approval with an engineering analysis to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I would just note, a lot of work went into putting this notice together. I thank my colleagues and so many people here at the FCC who participated in that, to find a balanced approach reflective of the interests of the Congress. Obviously, the need, as I said before, the impetus of delay is because of the feeling that consumers were not ready. But it is clearly a part of the statute also to provide flexibility to stations wishing to move ahead to be able to do so. I would just want to emphasize that that should not be for light or frivolous reasons, and that we really will be looking at this through the prism of the public interest and aware of the fact of the necessity, as Senator Rockefeller put it, I think very succinctly, put consumers first. Thank you all for your presentations. Let me ask Michael, first of all, I think it's good news that we're hearing that some of these production lines are open. How many of them are open? Do you have a feel for that? Or?
At this point, we are working off general information that we're getting from manufacturers and distributors. And again, the information we are getting, and this is, I just want to emphasize to you,
right.
it's things fluctuate quite
right.
quickly given the economy and the climate and so on. But we are hearing consistently from manufacturers and from retailers. There will be boxes in the stores in April.
So how long do you think it might be before we could get some idea of what the production capability of these production lines will be?
When we get more detailed information, we will certainly provide it to you.
Right. And then I guess I would just stress the importance as we go into this. There is a lot of uncertainty, as you say. We don't know exactly what the demand is going to be, and we need to figure a way to make sure those production lines are open until the last possible moment rather than going through the experience of having them shut down. David mentioned a problem that several of us have talked about, and that's people who are going to lose signals through no fault of their own, and you mentioned that we have some options like distributed transmission systems and others that have now been approved. With the extension of time afforded by the statute, is it reasonable to assume that within that time that we'll see some movement and people actually getting this distributed transmission systems and other options that you mentioned actually out so that it can make a difference before June 12th?
We hope so, Mr. Chairman, but there are a couple of things involved there. First of all, if you look at the spectrum situation, for example, in general terms on the East Coast, the availability of spectrum for additional translators is in fact a question. The second thing is that we have often found is that when one tries to build a translator, you have to go through local zoning approval to put a tower up. And that can be problematic in some instances. I certainly think that this is a tool that can be used and in a lot of situations may very well be used. But I can't sit here before you today and say that it will be used universally.
But don't a lot of these use existing towers?
Some do, but not all, sir.
Right.
It really will depend on the channel that's being used at this point. For example, distributed transmission systems would not use the same towers. You would go from a large tower, big stick, to multiple small towers throughout your market.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope we can work together to find ways to maybe make sure that now that we have some additional time, it's you point out we're going to pick up some new viewers, and I think that's wonderful. I'm not anticipating that they're going to call us up and say thank you very much, but I know darn well what's going to happen to those who are losing service, and they're not only going to yell at Commissioner McDowell and me, but they may have worse motivations in mind. I don't know.
Understood.
Okay, Commissioner Elstein.
Well, just to To follow up on that question, I mean, how are we going to get the word out to people? We very much appreciate, Julie, that you're doing this website, but first of all, a lot of people don't have access to the web. Second of all, those who do have access have a lot of things they want to look on at the web and not necessarily our little maps about where their television coverage is going to be or not. So a lot of people are never going to see our maps, and if they do try, some people won't be able to understand them as good of a job as you're doing of trying to make it consumer-friendly. How are we going to get the word out about the people that are going to lose their signal so that they're warned, essentially? I mean, what's the best mechanism for that?
Well, I think right now, I think the maps that were put out by Julie were really an important tool to try to isolate where the most critical areas are going to be. And most of those involve situations where your coverage area is actually changing. And I think now with the additional time that we have available, you will know in those specific areas that that's where the calls largely are going to be coming from. And that's where you can begin to focus your educational efforts.
Well, who's gonna do the education? I mean, how are we going to get the word to the people that in advance instead of having them all call us? If we know this is going to happen, can't we warn people in advance? I mean, can the broadcasters do that? Who's the best mechanism to get that word out?
Well, I think it'll be done at a local level, Commissioner. I think one of the key things that you balance there is, okay, where is the zone and what mechanisms are going to resolve that? For example, if you have a maximization application in front of the commission, that zone may very well change. It may get smaller. But I hear you in terms of that being sort of it really has to become a localized effort to reach out to those folks.
It really does, and the other panels we're going to have an overwhelmed call center. We don't have field operations ready to go. If we can take the pressure off of those call centers and those field operations by warning people in advance, I think it's critical that we do that. Moving on to the big issue of the day is, are there going to be enough boxes? I mean, that really is an important question raised by your testimony about whether or not there's going to be a shortfall. You raised the specter of one. Yesterday we spoke, and I thought that it was the case that there were no production lines open, but you've since discovered, I think, in the last day or so that there are, in fact, manufacturers who are starting up production again and can do it in 60 days, right? So this is new information.
Yeah, and again, Commissioner, it is a dynamic situation. We are talking with manufacturers and distributors on a daily basis, and so that is our latest good faith estimate. So
we're not sure what the nature is, Commissioner Copps, or Chairman Copps asked, of the capacity of production. There's a real possibility here, and maybe this is the big story of the day, that we're going to run out of boxes. I mean, your scenario is we run out possibly and have a shortfall in February or March. It could be that we run out before June 12th of boxes. This is a pretty serious issue.
Commissioner, there will be boxes. What we are saying is there will be boxes in the store by April. The potential shortfall, the worst case scenario would be a potential shortfall in February or March.
But since you don't know the production numbers, can you give us any assurance that those additional boxes produced will be sufficient to meet the demand that we may see in May and June?
Well, that is dependent on a demand of 115,000 redemptions per day. Now, again, this is difficult because the demand has fluctuated on a month-by-month basis. I believe in November it was 72,000, December it was 11,000, January was 114,000. So we're estimating at 115,000, which would be a historic high. And we also don't know what impact the delay until June is going to have on box demand. It may, people may be inclined to go and get their boxes now. People may say, well, something is not an issue, we can put this off and the box demand may decline. But at this point, we just don't know.
I wonder if there's a possibility of localized shortfalls, given that we've got a nationwide problem. I gave the example earlier of Puerto Rico, where it takes a longer lead time in order to get boxes by boat down to the island. Other places are difficult to access as well. I wonder if we can't anticipate that if there's a sort of close to a nationwide possible shortfall in February or March, if they might be more severe or marked or earlier in other parts of the country.
Commissioner, we have found no evidence of that thus far. There were some reports in Hawaii and some reports in West Virginia, and we called the retailers and found that was not true. Stores may run out of the product as they could with any product, but there are other stores nearby who had stock. So thus far, there has not been evidence of regional shortfalls.
But we haven't yet reached the point of a nationwide shortfall either, which you're presenting the specter of here today. We certainly appreciate everything you're doing to try to encourage manufacturers to reopen their lines and to produce sufficient ones. I think that the numbers that we were looking at from you indicate that there aren't enough boxes currently in inventory to meet our clearly expected demand, that there's a shortfall to the tune of millions. And if millions of additional boxes aren't produced, there's a high likelihood of a shortfall. And so we want to work with you to ensure that that doesn't happen, and appreciate your leadership and CEA's leadership and trying to keep those lines open, trying to keep those boxes going. Because I understand the demands on retailers are having a very difficult time. We all know what happened to Circuit City. We understand that they can't afford to carry these huge inventories. On the other hand, the public interest compels us to try to ensure that, because we're putting consumers through this difficult transition, that there isn't suddenly a lack of boxes, which is a real possibility here.
Well, Commissioner, there is nothing that can be done to increase the supply of boxes in the marketplace between now and April, when the new shipments come in. To the extent there's concern about a shortfall, I can share with you some of the suggestions that we have made to Congress, including encouraging boxes only to be applied for by over-the-air dependent households, by allowing boxes to be used for converter boxes that, due to their feature set, currently do not qualify for the program. One could allow boxes to be used for the purchase of DTVs priced under, say, $300. One could allow vouchers to be put toward cable or satellite subscription services. So there are things that one could do to kind of get over that potential gap, if such a gap existed.
Given that the next 60 days there's no additional boxes that are going to be made because the production lines are currently shut, and it's going to take at least 60 days to get additional boxes.
Production lines are currently running, but it will take until April for the boxes to arrive in the stores.
But they were shut until until the recent action by Congress. Is that what spurred additional production?
Once it, as you said, retailers are in a position where they don't want to be stuck sitting on excess inventory. When it became clear, or at least it became relatively evident that Congress was indeed going to extend the deadline or extend the transition date, then they began placing orders again with the manufacturers.
So your point is that there will be no additional boxes coming across the ocean for at least 60 days
until
April. So what we've got is what we've got. It may not be enough. There may be shortfalls. Given that situation, what do we tell consumers? And Joel, I'd be curious about your answer as well. I mean, do we tell consumers that there's potential shortfalls, you better act now? Is there an advantage to doing that in a sense because it's a real message in order to spur additional production? One of the problems with the lack of production is that, as you've indicated, manufacturers and retailers don't want to be stuck with a lot of inventory. So if we don't get people to start buying these things now, it's going to be hard for us to go to you and beg manufacturers to make more so that everybody can buy them at the last minute. I mean, if people don't start buying these things, they may not be able to get them when they want them. Is that a message that we want to put out?
I think the message that we have always put out, all of us together, and it's the correct message, is you should get your box and hook up your box as soon as possible.
But do we add that little part, which is there may not be any if you don't act now? We may run out.
What I wouldn't want to see happen is to see us put forth a narrative that would get consumers buying boxes without the coupons. After listening to Commissioner McDowell and his questions directed towards Mr. Wilhelm, we know that it's going to take a little while for the stimulus money to start pumping the coupons out to people's mailboxes. So we don't want to scare folks into going out and spending their own money that will never be repaid without the use of a coupon. But I do think that if we look at this and we can project what the demand between now and February will be, and if we can get a little bit of a better estimate between 3 and 6 million, that's kind of a big gap of boxes that are left on the shelves. I think it's great to know that there's going to be extra boxes to relieve that pressure in the marketplace in April. That's a wonderful, I think, piece of news today. But we also, I think you're right, we have to talk with retailers to make sure that they're making sure that they're stocking low-cost options for consumers. If that's not a possibility, then we should start to explore other creative options. $650 million in the stimulus is a good thing. Perhaps the White House can intervene and talk about stocking boxes or something else. I think the idea of using the coupons for boxes that to expand the specs of what NTIA originally did is a good idea, and using other converter boxes that are out there. I don't know about televisions. I think that's a lot of money for consumers to spend. But I think there's other creative options that are out there. What we don't want to have happen is consumers run to the stores, spend money out of their own pockets without the use of a coupon.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So actually, sort of put your finger on a good point, and Commissioner Adelstein, is that there might not be any boxes in mid-March, but the government has taken care of that for us, and that there won't be any coupons then either. So we don't need to worry about actually, my point on the coupons has been, in all seriousness, that unless you really need the coupon, I've been saying this for months, just go get the box. And this is based on my personal experience in my family. My oldest brother and my sister, who really can afford not to have the coupon, applied for the coupons. And my oldest brother, the Honorable Mayor of El Segundo, California, had the good graces to let his coupon expire so someone else can have it. But my sister, who's one of the cheapest people you'll ever meet, even cheaper than I am, used her coupon. I would hope, and I think part of the backlog, too, is there are a lot of people there who could afford to buy a converter box who have applied for the coupon. So my message has been maybe a little bit different from yours. If you don't really need it, be charitable to your fellow citizen. Just buy the box without the coupon, and this might have saved some of the problems that we have incrementally. But I think we do have two sort of bombshells here today. One is the NTIA bombshell that the coupons will be clogged up. The pipeline there will be clogged up for quite some time. And we don't know when the stimulus package will get through. We don't know if even that provision will survive. Keep in mind. We think it will, but we don't know for sure. And the other is, for now, not enough boxes. And for a while. I understand. I heard you say there's going to be a shortage for a while.
There's actually a range. If we believe the most likely scenario is there are approximately 6 million boxes in inventory.
Well, you said between 3 and 6.
We believe,
and your most likely scenario is 6, but I like to go with the worst case scenario, which is 3.
That's fine. But assuming the 6, and again assuming the redemption rate, which is a tricky thing to calculate, but we're going with what would effectively be a historic high, then that would take us through April when the new boxes begin coming in.
But according to Nielsen, there were, at last count, 6.5 million households, I think, that weren't prepared, and that's an estimate. This is all guesswork, and this is why it's been so difficult for your members. I'm not holding anyone at all, in disregard here. It's been very difficult. They relied on February 17th, as did broadcasters, as did a lot of folks. And we've changed the deadline, and this is one of the consequences of changing it, which I've been talking about now for a couple of weeks too. But so again, we're not here for the blame game, but just to get an accurate picture of what's going to happen. In that you're not sure how many more boxes can be in production and on the shelves and in people's hands by June the 12th. That's not your fault. It's because your member companies relied on a certain date and a certain model. We were talking about modeling earlier on a different panel. Very smart people came out with a lot of models. But now we have a different model, and it's called reality, and we're trying to figure out the depth of that reality. So it is a frightening situation. But anyway, my only question for you, really, is the creation of a secondary market. We've informally in my office gone out to eBay, and yes, there are boxes on eBay. And if one had bought futures, maybe one could have bought them cheaply a few weeks ago, and could be making money on boxes in the secondary market because now there's a shortage. But what's the development of the secondary market? There are some people, I know just from firsthand anecdotal experience, who bought boxes thinking they were for digital cable. They were digital cable boxes, okay. And then they realized they weren't. And so then what do they do with them? They couldn't return them or whatever, so they're selling them to their neighbors or at a yard sale or on eBay. So what's your experience with the secondary market?
We are not aware of a thriving secondary market at this point. Certainly in going back to Commissioner Edelstein's question, one of the downsides of putting out a message saying there may not be enough boxes, go run and get one now, is that hoarding could develop and a secondary market could develop. Again, I would suggest we encourage people not only don't get your coupon if you don't need it, but also if you have a box and you're not going to use it, find somebody who does.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I think this has been extremely helpful. And this goes to show that when you get people together from different groups and organizations, new information does come out, and we learn new things, and that's the kind of dialogue that we should have been having these last 2 years on a regular basis so that you can identify problems before they become crises or unsolvable and make the necessary mid-course corrections. And and move on. But this has been helpful. I will spare you any concluding statement. I think we've all probably made our general orientations and preferences clear here. Let me ask my colleagues if either has any announcement or concluding remark that they feel compelled to present.
Just thank you. I think you're correct. This has been fantastic. We appreciate all the witnesses, and I've learned a lot. And having this open dialogue is something that's refreshing and welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have no further comment about the panels, but we do have a law clerk who has patiently sat through two very long.
Please proceed.
Thank you for your indulgence. Timothy McNamara, you want to stand up briefly, Timothy? He's patiently sat through two very long commission meetings, one on January 15th, thinking he would be introduced at the end of that, and that was, of course, Chairman Martin's last meeting, so that didn't happen. But he's shown his endurance by waiting all the way through till today to get introduced. So he's joining us. He's from the Franklin Pierce Law Center in Concord, New Hampshire. How do you pronounce that? Concord? Is that how you say it? Concord, okay. And then I really need your help. He is fluent in Mandarin Chinese and has studied at, what was the name of the law school in Beijing? Okay, that sounded pretty easy. Okay. It doesn't look that easy when it's written out, by the way. But and is also fluent in French, and we're delighted to have him. And my favorite little piece of trivia about him is one of his publications that he published for a newsletter is How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love China. So that's hopefully a good advice for all of us. And Jonathan's not here, right? Jonathan will introduce the next meeting? Okay. Thank you very much. We're happy to have you on board, and we're going to work you hard.
All right. We have equal endurance in the COPS office, I'm proud to say, because Paul Murray has been sitting patiently over here, and he is on detail to help us during this transition with our wireless affairs. Everybody here, or many people here, know Paul. He has a distinguished past, having clerked for well-known judges, actually worked and tried the halls of the U.S. Senate where I used to work. I think we actually overlapped there for a couple of years. You were the young guy coming in, I was the older guy going out, I guess. And has been here at the commission since, I think, 2000. Educated at Stanford University, and I hope you're impressed with this, Duke University Law School, and then Harvard. But in spite of this ethereal education here, he appears to be a true man of the people, and we are delighted to have him working with us. And I also want to thank, other members of my staff, but in the COPS office we have a tradition of everybody working on everything, and Scott Deutschman is sitting over here, and he has been of also tremendous help working with Rick and Gary and I on DTV. So with that, Madam Secretary, would you announce the next meeting, please?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission will be on Thursday, March 5th, 2009.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for participating in the panel discussion and sitting through this, and members of the press too. This meeting is adjourned.